So welcome to our accounts receivable practice questions. So ganito ang magiging mechanics ng ating practice questions na ito. If-flash ko po ang questions sa screen mo, gaya nito. Tapos, ipo-pause mo yung screen. Pag na-solve mo na ang problem, then play it again for the next questions. Sa solutions naman, ganito ang gagawin natin. So yan ang beginning balance natin ng the allowance for doubtful accounts. Tapos, ang sabi ng problem natin is, during the year, the accounts receivable of 35,000 were written off. So, ano ang effect ng write-off? So, isusulat ko lahat ng mga concepts na kakailanganin natin para ma-analyze natin yung question for each questions. Then, isusulat natin dito yung mga solutions. Halika, samahan mo akong mag-analyze ng accounts receivable practice questions. Alright, question number 5. The requirement is, how much should Blue Water report as accounts receivable net of allowance for doubtful accounts on its year 2 balance sheet? So, ang hinahanap ng problem dito is yung amount na accounts receivable kung saan dinidak na natin ang allowance for doubtful accounts. And this amount is also called as net realizable value. So, mag-uumpisa tayo sa accounts receivable ending. Ended with the accounts receivable ending, ililess natin yung allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright, ito ang formula na gagamitin natin. So, we are going to start with the accounts receivable ending, and then we will less our allowance for doubtful accounts na ending din. Tapos, makikita natin kung magkano ang ating net realizable value of our accounts receivable. Yan po ang hinahanap ng problem natin. On its December 31st year 1 balance sheet, Blue Water Company reported accounts receivable of $855,000, net of an allowance for doubtful accounts of $45,000. So, ano ba itong $855,000? Yan ang net realizable value last year. So, hindi po yan ang hinahanap ng problem. Ang hinahanap ng problem is yung net realizable value ng year 2 sa balance sheet. On December 31st, year 2, Blue Water Company's balance sheet showed gross accounts receivable of $922,000. And yan na po yung ating accounts receivable ending. Alright? Now, magkano kaya ang ating allowance for doubtful account? In Blue Water income statement reported sales of $3 million. 60% are credit sales. During the year, accounts receivable of $35,000 were written off and $18,000 were recovered. So, to be able to solve for the ending balance of our allowance for doubtful accounts, mag-uumpisa tayo sa beginning balance ng allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright? Alright, magkano ang ating allowance for doubtful accounts beginning? $45,000. So, yan ang beginning balance natin ng the allowance for doubtful accounts. Tapos, ang sabi ng problem natin is, during the year, the accounts receivable of $35,000 were written off. So, ano ang effect ng write-off sa ating allowance for doubtful account? Our entry for writing off an accounts receivable is debit to allowance for doubtful accounts, then credit to accounts receivable. Yan po ang ating entry kapag nagra-write off tayo ng accounts receivable. So, we debit our allowance for doubtful accounts. For this $35,000 na ni-write off ni Blue Water, yan po ay minus sa ating allowance for doubtful accounts. And $18,000 were recovered. So, ano ba ang effect ng recovery sa ating allowance for doubtful accounts? Ang recovery is addition to our allowance for doubtful accounts. Ano bang entry natin sa recovery? We debit our accounts receivable dahil naka-recover tayo and credit to allowance for doubtful accounts to set up this accounts receivable na nasingil natin. And then, we will debit our cash na nakolekta natin, tapos aalisin natin ulit sa accounts receivable natin and credit to accounts receivable. So sa recovery, ang effect niya sa ating allowance for doubtful accounts ay credit. So we are adding this recovery to our balance. So we plus recovery. Based on past experience, 2% of blue water credit sales are uncollectible. Anong ginagamit na method ng company? Percentage of credit sales. So remember, percentage of credit sales, yan na po yung bad debts expense natin. Itong amount makukompute natin, yan na po yung bad debts expense natin. I-add lang natin yan sa ating remaining allowance for doubtful account, alright, before this bad debts expense, yan na po ang magiging ending natin. Alright? So we will add our bad debts expense or doubtful accounts expense. Parehas lang po yan. So the computations of your doubtful account expense or bad debts expense is 3 million multiplied by 60% because sabi ng problem is 60% are credit sales. So 3 million times 60%, which is the credit sales percentage, multiplied by 2%, we come out with a bad debts expense or doubtful account expense as 36,000. So ina-add po natin yan. Alright? Dahil ang ginagamit natin ay percentage of credit sales. Then we will come out with ending balance of our allowance for doubtful accounts of 64,000. Ito po ang ating ending balance ng ating allowance for doubtful accounts. Yan po ang ima-minus natin dito. 64,000. Then we will have 858,000. Ito po yung answer natin. Yan ang hinahanap ng problem. And our answer will be letter A. Alright, question number 6. So the requirement on question number 6 is what amount of allowance for uncollectible accounts should Nestle report in its December 31st year 2 balance sheets? So anong hinahanap ng problem? Ang hinahanap ng problem ay yung ending balance ng allowance for uncollectible accounts ng December 31st year 2. At December 31st year 1, Nestle Company allowance for uncollectible accounts had a credit balance of 30,000. So yung 30,000, yan po yung ending balance last year, December 31st of year 1. So meaning to say, yan po ang magiging beginning balance natin ng January 1st of year 2. Alright? During year 2, Nestle wrote off accounts of 45,000. At December 31st, year 2, an aging of accounts receivable indicates that 50,000 of the December 31st, year 2 receivable may be uncollectible. So, let's go back to our concept. Aging of accounts receivable, percentage of the accounts receivable, and a percentage of the credit sales. Alright? Kung ang gagamitin natin ay aging of accounts receivable or itong percentage of accounts receivable, yung amount na makukuha natin dyan, yan na po yung ending balance natin sa allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright? Itong amount na yan, yan ang magiging ending balance natin. Back to the problem. At December 31st, year 2, an aging of accounts receivable indicated that 50,000 of the December 31st, year 2 receivable may be uncollectible. So, anong hinahanap ng problem? Yung ending balance. At ang ginagamit ng problem ay yung aging of your accounts receivable. So, ang ibig sabihin, yung 50,000, yan na rin po yung answer natin. Alright? So, our answer is 50,000 according to the aging of the accounts receivable. So, our answer is letter D. If you know the concept, kahit balik-balik ta rin ka, makukuha mo pa rin ang answer. Alright?